Right, thank you everyone for coming along to session 3 this afternoon. So for our final session we have Garry Collins to present to us spelling and vocabulary development. Please make him welcome.
Thank you. Great to see that people have lasted into the home stretch. You know, everyone has one of the handouts. Yep. A couple of points to... you already got a handout? This is a workshop, which means it's not just me talking, so you'll be asked to do some stuff. It says spelling and vocabulary development. The focus will mainly be on spelling, but if you recall, one of the things that Professor Beryl-Exley said this morning, at least the way I heard her, that spelling should be related to meaning. And so if you're dealing with words because they're challenging to spell, you'd probably also be focusing on their meaning. So I suggest the two would go hand in hand. Now sometimes there are spelling issues, of course, with very common words, you know, the 3 twos and the 3 theirs, for instance. And meaning as well, you know, there is an element of meaning there because the people are clear on the meaning, some of them won't be confused. But the focus mainly on spelling. Now, when I first prepared this, and it grew out of some material I prepared for a workshop in Mackay earlier in the year, and I suggested to ETAC's PD committee that, well, maybe this could run as a standalone thing like the grammar workshops I run from time to time, and they thought this year's program was a bit crowded for that, and therefore why don't I offer it as a workshop at the state conference, which I duly did, obedient soul that I am. And while I knew that Beryl was going to be the keynote speaker, I didn't realise she was going to be speaking on spelling, and then I thought, oh gee, well, I hope that what I'm suggesting in this session reinforces rather than conflicts with anything she said this morning, but if you identify any tension there, it will be worthwhile thinking about that, I suggest. Okay, that's from her abstract, and just this bit struck me, specific spelling lessons. Now, Beryl's school teaching experiences from the primary level, and maybe they have specific spelling focused lessons in primary schools. We don't really do that in high schools, do we? Might have spelling focused episodes, teaching and learning episodes focused on spelling, but no one would be devoting a whole 50, 60, 70-minute lesson to spelling, I don't think, would it? No. Maybe primary school teachers use the word lesson for segments within, you know, we're an hour and a half block, largely, don't they? Hour and a half, 2 hour block. Okay, there are some statements about spelling. Just have a look through them, will you, and figure out what your view is and share that with a neighbour at your table. Needs to be a little bit of buzz of talk now. Okay, would someone like to offer for the whole group a comment about any one of them, or all of them if you'd like? Anyone?
Spelling, it's not that it doesn't really matter provided that the writer's meaning is clear, because it impedes on meaning. You have to sit there and actually figure out what the word is. Mm-hmm. So the actual flow of the essay and the meaning of it as a whole is affected if the spelling is really poor.
Often though, when teachers respond to student work, they know what the word's intended to mean, what the word's intended to be. It's just that the arrangement of letters is not the standard one. Thank you. Another contribution?
In secondary, so much of our kids' work gets to us word processed. The only actual fresh writing that we see is in exam conditions. Everything else comes through a word process. Everything else has been spell checked. So some of the...
Which will solve perhaps most problems, won't solve all problems.
Not at all, but it means that we're not getting an idea about kids spelling issues.
That's a good point.
Get to see some real writing.
Anything else? Yes?
I do believe that some people are born good spellers and others are not, but I don't think that it's
I think they are born, or they socialise? Are there early learning experiences?
Well, I think they have. They're born genetically quite predisposed towards language. Perhaps they've had lots of oral experiences. In my own case, I've never had any problem spelling. There weren't a lot of books in our house, but Mum and Dad always spoke to us and used interesting language and varied language from a different. Didn't have an Australian accent. But I think other people are not born good spellers, but I don't think that means the game's over for them. They can learn strategies to become better spellers and not to be freaked out by I'm a terrible speller, so that's the end of me. Like there's hope.
Certainly by the time we get kids in secondary school, some of them are quite competent spellers and others have a history of lack of success. Now, all of those statements on that screen I wrote. I mean, the ideas aren't originally mine, but I wrote all of those for use in a pre-service teaching course, and my intention was for them to say to students, no, they're all wrong. You know, you need to proceed on the basis that none of them are right. Okay? So, secondary school teachers certainly do need, and this is one of the things Beryl said this morning, need to explicitly teach spelling, need to go on doing that, not just assuming, look, primary school teachers should have done that, and if they didn't, well, too bad. That's not good enough. And so you should proceed on the basis that all of those statements are wrong, or at the very best, they're not helpful. Have a think about this. How important is spelling? And you might think, well, in relation to education or in the world generally, and maybe you'd have different answers there, but how would you rate it? Highly important? Not at all important. Just come up with a number, and again, you've got about 20 to 30 seconds just to share with a neighbour. Or maybe we could do a poll. Has everyone decided on a number? Anyone? Put up your hand if you're a 1. Not important at all. Unlikely to find English teachers saying that. 2. 3, some 3s, 4, any 5s? Yeah, it's the sort of thing you'd expect from English teachers. If you're a random sample of the population, perhaps, the average response would shift along a little bit. On this screen is an achievement standard from the Australian curriculum. There's one of these for each year level. It's a sort of a summation of what students should achieve. Now, you probably can't even read that very easily, but there's a swag of words there. How many of them relate to spelling? Just at the end there. And it's linked with punctuation, okay? Accurate spelling and punctuation. Percentage of all the words there, well, I didn't do a count, but it's pretty small, isn't it? What about in 11 and 12? Now that's the third page of one of these ISMGs. We all know what that stands for. It's Instrument Specific Marking Guide, isn't it? Part of the Brave New World. And it takes the syllabus 3 pages to present one of these. There's several of them, and each of them takes 3 pages. One of my complaints about, and it's not just this syllabus that does this, frequently syllabus documents present material in what I would suggest is an inefficient way. They don't make things easy for teachers who then have to use these things in schools. What I did on this document was to repackage that stuff into a table that fitted on a single side of A4. Again, that's too small for you to read, but you can see the 3 criteria. The one on the previous sheet This one is just the third bit, textual features. Okay, the third row, textual features. And you note that these numbers don't run sequentially because they're the numbered objectives. So knowledge application relates to objectives 3, 4 and 5. Then we get 1, 2, 6, 7 and so on. So this next slide is an enlargement of that. And again, I don't necessarily want you to read all that, but if you look at the bunch of text there, and it's just this bit that relates to spelling, okay? Conventional spelling, and again it's linked with punctuation. Is it helpful to do that? No. But they frequently do that. We come back to this though. On both of those, do you think if we did the sums on the percentage, would that really represent how important English teachers think spelling is? It really has an importance bigger than that, doesn't it? I mean, Arcara thinks it's important enough, as Beryl pointed out this morning, and I'm sure you already were aware of this, that in NAPLAN it gets sampled twice. One of the 10 criteria that are used to evaluate the on-demand writing, and it's a specific segment of the writing conventions test. Now, is that because spelling, along with punctuation and grammar, are that important, or is it that they are easy to test? It's really the latter, isn't it? And sometimes we have an unfortunate conflation of what we're talking about, different elements. I frequently use this slide in segments on grammar, and people say, well, look, the problem here is grammar. Well, it's not really. The issue here is a spelling one with there, confusion with other words that sound the same, and this is really a punctuation issue, isn't it? So I'm just suggesting it needs to be, it's helpful to be clear about what you're talking about. Although I suppose with contractions, which is what we've got here, you know, spelling and punctuation do jam up against one another, don't they? Now the issue with the first one is one of the areas of problem in English spelling. The fact that we have a whole lot of homophones from two Greek words, homos the same and phonos sound, and etymology is useful to us. And we have a whole lot of these in English, particularly amongst the most commonly used words. Now, Beryl had a list of the 100 most commonly used words. If you stretch that out a bit to say the most common 300 words, you'll have a whole lot of homophones, which is difficult enough for native speakers to get their head around from the point of view of spelling, and must be really challenging for people learning English from the base of another language. You're familiar with the structure of the F to 10 Australian curriculum. The naming of this sub-strand here has changed. As a result, it was originally called something else. It was originally called, I can't remember now, word knowledge perhaps. That's where we get mentions of spelling, but after year 6, there's no more mention of that substrand. So the segment of the Australian curriculum that secondary teachers would most commonly look at, the references to spelling are in the expressing and developing ideas substrand. Okay, so they're here. But up to year 6, there's that separate substream. This slide simply shows some content descriptions, one for each of years 7, 8, 9 and 10, where spelling gets a specific mention, which does indicate that this is something that secondary teachers do need to be specifically teaching. And of course, if you've got a year 10 class, that does not mean that the only elements of the Australian curriculum you need to pay any attention to is the year 10 one. That's your primary focus, but there's all the stuff that led up to that. Now, kids should have learnt it, but that would be in an ideal world, wouldn't it? You need to be aware of what they should have, and you will need to revisit some parts of it if the need arises. Oh, I should, just while it occurs to me, if you think that this slide sequence is of any use to you and you'd like it, my email address is on the bottom of that handout. If you'd like it, just send me an email, I'll happily send it to you. So here we're looking at the Year 7 language stream, and we've got this bit down the bottom. Now you can't read that. It's about spelling rules and word origins. It says understand how to use spelling rules and word origins, for example, Greek and Latin roots, space words, suffixes, prefixes, spelling patterns and generalisations to learn new words. Now, Beryl talked about spelling rules, so-called rules, because we, in common parlance, did you get a handout over here? You'll need one of these. We commonly refer to them as rules, but they're not really rules in the sense that we have rules for, for various sports. They are generalisations. Someone has looked at how the spelling system has worked and said, well, here's a pattern. Here's a generalisation about that pattern which frequently occurs and could be useful. And that's why there will always be exceptions, because it's not a case of someone having drawn up the rules and then developed the system. The spelling system was there, and these so-called rules are just aids to learning that someone came up with. And of course, this common one, I before E except after C, now that works better if you have this extra line when the sound is double E, when it's a long E sound, E. If it's not an E sound, then this generalisation doesn't apply anyway. Beryl had a similar slide, didn't she?
I like I before E has been disproved by science.
It works there with deceive and conceits, but it doesn't work with any of those other ones, does it? Now, I'm suggesting this is a useful question to put to students at any year level. I would frequently do this in the first week of school with any year level. Complete the definition. Jot it down if you like, or just compose it in your head. What are words? Words are. Complete your definition. No need to write it down if you like, but just compose it in your head. And I'm just role-playing what I do with the class here. Would someone like to give us their suggestion? Words are?
Tools for communication.
Words are communication.
Tools for communication.
Yeah, so is that. So definitions need to...
Chunks of meaning made up from sound.
Good one, good one. So can we hear some other ones? And playing around with definitions is a useful mental activity with students because it needs to clearly describe what the thing is, but exclude the stuff that it's not. Now, words certainly involve communication, but...
Sounds that humans have given meaning to.
Sounds that humans... Yes, I like that. Has anyone got a different one? There's a bit of similarity there. Frequently... Anyone? Frequently when I've done this, quite a number of students will come up with a definition that is along the lines of combinations of letters that have meaning. And I generally say, well, no, that's not really satisfactory. Why might I say that?
Because they don't have to be written down.
So again,
They don't have to be written down to be a word.
and then I would say to students, how many Indigenous languages were extant on this continent before Europeans arrived? I don't know the correct answer, but it's of the order of what? 10, 100, 1,000?
Hundreds.
It's been between 100 and 1,000. It might be 500 or 600, but then there are definitional problems about, dialects of the one language, but hundreds of them. How many of those were written languages? 0. So clearly, in the development of languages in cultures, and as small human beings develop, they use words. You think about a small child, they can say words and they can understand words before they've mastered the system of writing them or reading them. So we need to have a basic definition, an original definition of words connected with sound, so meaningful sounds. And I'd suggest to students meaningful speech sounds. And you might think, well, okay, but where's he going with this? Well, this is where I'm going with this. We have basically two types of speech sounds. And again, I venture to say that if you ask any high school class anywhere across the state what are vowels and consonants, the majority of students at any year level will tell you they're letters of the alphabet. True or not true? That's not really the most helpful way to think about it. And this is another way of looking at what Beryl was saying this morning, not about letters having sounds, but sounds having letters. Okay? We make basically two different sorts of speech sounds when we speak the language. Vowel sounds is where our mouth is basically open and we're not impeding the flow of air completely. Okay? And the different quality of the sound comes from the different shape we put our mouth in. Unfortunately, you do it automatically, you don't have to think about it. Whereas with consonant sounds, you are impeding completely, temporarily, or stopping it completely or just impeding it. So we have sounds like the P or B sound, where you put your lips together and build up a little bit of pressure behind them and release them. But they're called plosives.
Bilabial plosive, that one.
Say again?
Bilabial plosive, that one is.
It's a bilabial, isn't it? Very good. I didn't know that. Whereas with an S or a Z, you're forcing the air out through an arrow. And with the first, the vocal cords aren't vibrating, it's not voiced. With the Z sound, you can put your fingers on your throat and you can feel your vocal cords vibrate. And I would get kids to do that. Now, the vowel sounds in English are represented by the letters A, E, I, O and U, and in a word like fly, by the letter Y. True? As opposed to in a word like yellow or young, it represents a consonant sound, a Y sound. Now some further questions I'd suggest is useful to put to students. How many letters in the alphabet? 26. How many of them represent vowel sounds? Well, not possibly, 6.
Right, sometimes.
Yeah, well, sometimes, yeah. 6 letters. Therefore, and here's my next question for student, how many of the 26 letters represent consonant sounds? Yeah, the answer is 21. Some kids will automatically say 20, but Y's in both camps. Okay? Just a little bit of numeracy in English in passing, you don't get many opportunities. So, my next question I put to student, how many different vowel sounds are there in English? And I suggest you should get students to do this by a little bit of research. And the task would be to make a list of one-syllable words that have a different vowel sound in the middle. And so you could start off with mat and mate. Short A, long A. Now there's perhaps a problem there we'll come back to, but can you see A and a longer A sound? So I'd suggest to students what you should do now is make your list of one-syllable words. There are 2 words to start with, and you could systematically work through the letters I, O, U, the other vowel letters. Just have a quick go for about 30 seconds. How many words with a different vowel sound in? One-syllable word, different vowel sound. Anyone in the double figures yet?
Yes.
We don't have time to completely work through that, but can you see how you could get students to do that? So you'd end up with a list something like this. See, I've worked through A, E, I, O, U, and for each of them I've got a short and a long, and then there are other ones: car, cow, bear, more, girl. I'm not suggesting that's an exhaustive list, but already we've got, what, 15. And the important distinction there, which helps us with spelling a range of other words, is the distinction between a short vowel and a long vowel. Now, we have this curiosity of our spelling system with these silent E's on the end. They just tell us that that's a long vowel in the middle. In terms of sound, we've got an initial consonant sound, we've got a vowel sound in the middle, and we've got a concluding consonant sound. Now, experts say, and Beryl had this information on one of her slides this morning, there are 44 phonemes in English, distinctive sounds. How many of those are vowels? Well, even the experts differ a bit about this. That's why I've got a question mark there. But it's of the order of about 12 pure vowel sounds, and then there are collection of diphthongs where one vowel sound glides into another, A, okay, that sort of thing. And we've got 24 consonants. The experts can agree on the consonants. But we've only got these 26 symbols. And the problem is mainly with vowels, isn't it? Not solely, but it's mainly with vowels. What's her name again? Poor old Julia. Now, educated woman, smart woman, but she was caught out mispronouncing this word because apparently she'd only ever seen it in print, one would deduce, and really she was applying common sense. Because B-O-L-E is in fact the word bowl, and it rhymes with goal, hole, mole, pole, roll, soul. And the way she pronounced it, hyperbole, that's how we spell bowl, but of course that doesn't rhyme with owl, cow, fowl and howl. And that just illustrates part of the difficulty we're dealing with.
I don't know if that's a thing, because I'm from South Australia also, and I've always said hyperbole.
Truly.
We had a teacher, a maths teacher, taught to teach an English class at our school, and he taught at year level of year 9's hyperbole, and the next year we got them in year 10 and had to go and reteach them all of it.
Well, I suggest you go and check a dictionary. I think you find most of the rest of the English-speaking world pronounces hyperbole.
Yeah.
Is that because it comes from a different origin?
Probably.
Like a French
Probably.
kind of family?
Probably. Okay?
Yeah, I've always
In my earlier session today, which most of you people weren't discriminating enough to select, was looking at dealing with vocabulary in the context of a poem, and one of the words was panache. And the spelling says pan, ache, but we don't pronounce it that way because it comes into English from French, from Italian. And it's useful to remind students that a lot of our words have a mismatch between the spelling and the pronunciation because of their etymology, where they come from. And a good simple example would be the word rendezvous, which we get from French. We don't pronounce that rendezvous, okay? Because that's not how the French say it. Okay, another little game, trick thing that it's useful to use with students, I think.
fish.
How do you pronounce that word? And if you know, just keep your mouth shut. How do you pronounce that word? Someone?
Goatee?
Goatee? Wrong, it's fish. Should be obvious. It's the GH as in tough, it's the O as in women, and it's the TI as in motion. This is usually attributed to George Bernard Shaw, who, apart from being a playwright, was an advocate of reforming English spelling. Now, there have been various attempts at this over the years, and the Americans with Webster's Dictionary did do a little bit of it, but the notion has never caught on and is unlikely ever to. What deductions might we draw from this, though? Not just, I've caught you out game. in terms of teaching spelling,
Context is key.
so again,
Context is key.
context, yep. There are irregularities in English spelling. Okay, and this is part of Beryl's starting point, wasn't it, this morning? We don't have a completely phonetic language. If we did, if you were designing a language from start, you say, well, we've got 44 phonemes, we'll create an alphabet that has 44 symbols. One symbol, one sound. Once you'd learnt the correspondences, you'd be able to pronounce and spell every word, wouldn't you? But that's not what we've got, because real languages don't develop like that. They grow like topsy. So, it's not completely straightforward. And as I said, if we were designing a language, we wouldn't produce what we've got. Now here's a very useful little book by David Crystal, who's a well-known English linguist. And he claims in that book that 84%, I wonder how you can be so precise, 84, not 85, but anyway, 84% of English words are spelled according to regular patterns. And only 3% are so unpredictable that they need to be learnt by rote. Do you think that's right? That strikes you as reasonable? What should that mean for teaching practice then?
That 84% of your teaching of spelling should be about patterns.
Yeah, so what that means for me is that we should explicitly teach these patterns. We should draw them to students' attention when we're working with real texts, authentic texts for other purposes, not, gee, I'm going to teach pattern X today, but a case of we're working with this bit of text, and that's why you've got a handout which seems to have unrelated material on it. Again, that's from a university course I taught, and I was using it to do other stuff, primarily, talking about the role of Shakespeare in English programs, amongst other things, but then using that text to teach some aspects of spelling in the context of whatever else we were doing with authentic texts. So we should make those patterns explicit for students. He does go on to say, though, and this complicates it, many of the 400 or so irregular spellings are amongst the most frequently used words. So it compounds the problem, doesn't it? And it makes English spelling seem more chaotic than it really is if you look at the language in its totality. And it's worth pointing that out to students too. You might be having a fair bit of difficulty with spelling, but in fact most words do have a reasonably common sense sound letter correspondence once you're aware of some patterns. And that's just his website if you want to go and look at some of his other stuff. Now, this is a very useful book that I would strongly recommend. Misty Adenu is a lecturer at Canberra University, and part of it she says morphemes are much more useful than syllables. Now, she doesn't say that only morphemes are useful and syllables are of no use. She says they're more useful. Sometimes syllables will be useful, and Beryl, if I heard correctly, did acknowledge this, but you get more value, you get more mileage out of focusing on meaning, and that's where morphemes comes in. Simply breaking into sound units is forgetting about the meaning. Who was not aware of what morphemes were before this morning? Just curious. New word for anyone today? Oh, that's reassuring. Good, honest person. Beryl described them as what the smallest words. Well, some of them can't operate as words on their own. And this notion of what's frequently called the rank scale. If we're talking about texts, we're talking about prose texts anyway. Texts are made up of paragraphs Paragraphs are made up of sentences, sentences are made up of clauses, clauses are made up of groups and phrases, which are made up of words, which are made up of morphemes, the smallest meaningful unit. Now, it's not the same as a syllable, because the word mother, for instance, has 2 syllables, doesn't it? But in terms of meaning, you can't break that into moth and okay? Now, with a lot of ER words you can. Painter is someone who paints, but that doesn't work with mother. Spelling is concerned with these 2 levels down the bottom. Now, at different times in English classrooms, you will come in at different levels and look at the language at a different level. But when we're focusing on spelling, it's down here at the level of words and morphemes. And just to look at the words on that screen, they're all plural nouns, aren't they, within the table. So take a word like texts. There are 2 morphemes. There's the morpheme text, and then there's the S on the end that tells us that it's plural. 2 morphemes. In paragraphs, we've got 3 morphemes. How many syllables? Paragraph. Well, again, there are 3 syllables, and not the same divisions, are they? In terms of morphemes, we've got para, we've got graph, and we've got the S telling us it's plural. Some morphemes can function as words. Take the word I, whether you mean the personal pronoun or the bit of jelly either side of your nose, or that old-fashioned word meaning yes. They are free morphemes, they can function as words. In fact, you probably can't add them onto anything. Eyeglass, you could, couldn't you? That would be a morpheme. Some are what are called bound morphemes. These are either word roots, which frequently derive from Greek or Latin, or they're prefixes or suffixes, bits we tack on the front, bits we tack on the meaningful bits. And often the structure of words we can see in English have a word root or stem, plus a prefix on the front, plus a suffix on the end. And looking at the morphemes that make that up is focusing on the meaning and is a better path to helping kids spell them. So if we look at the word unpredictable on that screen there, we've got prefix un, prefix pre, stem dict, which comes from a Latin word meaning to say or tell, and we have this adjectival suffix. And there are a whole lot of other words that similarly have this dict stem in them. Okay? Although here I'm focusing on the prefixes first, un, not the opposite of, pre, before, dict, etc. Right. Who thinks that through their schooling they got a really good grasp of prefixes and suffixes and Greek and Latin roots? Okay, this is an age sampling. People of my vintage probably yes. Now, if you're a bit younger than that, other advantages of that, of course, your body probably works better than mine does. But you need to progressively build up your understanding of these, and it's easy to Google prefixes and find sites which have heaps of examples of them, but start from words that occur in text that you're working with. She goes on to say, understanding how words built from morphemes improves spelling and increases vocabulary. See, spelling and vocabulary tied together there. Beryl had a list of principles this morning out of Misty's book. She's got these. Try these on for size. Start with meaning. Teach spelling explicitly. Teach a repertoire of spelling knowledge. I'll expand on that in a moment. And her teaching background was in the primary sector too. That's why she says, I think, integrate spelling across all subject areas. Well, we don't get an opportunity to do that, but no matter what text you're working with in English, there's an opportunity for a little segment, a little teaching, learning episode in relation to spelling. And of course, in whole school literacy programs, you should be trying to encourage your colleagues in other discipline areas to, as Beryl said this morning, accept the responsibility for teaching, understanding and spelling of words that are special to their discipline. It's probably not unreasonable for the science or maths teacher to say, well, why can't you get people to distinguish between T-H-E-R-E, T-H-E-I-R and T-H-E-Y apostrophe? Okay, cop that. When you get people to understand anything about the universe, come back and check in with me again. So this repertoire, and the repertoire relates to morphology, the segments of meaning. Orthography is the spelling system, and I think Beryl probably hinted at that when she talked about the visual impact, what letter patterns look like. Etymology, the word history, where it comes from, and phonology, the sound system. She goes on to say, and she emphasised that you should teach spelling every day. Probably not what I'd say in relation to secondary English is that most lessons should have at least a small in-passing focus on spelling. Most, many, I wouldn't necessarily say all, because sometimes we've got other fish to fry, haven't we? Repetition is useful because few of us learn and completely absorb anything by being exposed to it once. But that's not the same thing as rote learning, is it? Rote is meaningless learning. You know, you're just learning it parrot fashion. By all means, repeat things and be able to say to kids, oh, look at this word here. We saw that same letter pattern last week in those other words. So repetition, meeting things on numerous occasions. But there's meaning involved, so it's not just rote. I asked Beryl after the segment session this morning how many primary schools still have weekly spelling lists. Some of you would have kids in primary school that have weekly spelling lists. And where do those words come from? And the kids just have to learn them from a list, don't they? Is that good practice? I don't think so. And Beryl agreed, it's not good practice. It's better practice if those words come from text that students are going to be using in that week, and if they do then encounter them in meaningful context. Is it really helpful to learn them in isolation? Probably not the best practice. Here's another putting together of an approach to spelling words that my friend and colleague Lindsay Williams put together. Look inside the word, so that's finding the morphemes. Say the sounds of the letter patterns in the morphemes. Write the morphemes of the word without looking at it and check yourself. You might agree or disagree as to whether that's useful at the end. Okay, little spelling quiz now.
Can we go back one slide? Sorry, I just wanted to, I couldn't write it down quick enough.
You don't have to write it down. If you send me an email, I'll send you the whole PowerPoint.
I'm good, I got it. Thank you.
Okay, write these words down, spelling quiz. Is that a reasonable response? But anyway, write these words, revealed. It was later revealed that there had been a secret plot, revealed. Simplify. There are editions of Shakespeare on the market now where they simplify the text. Easily. This will enable some students more easily to comprehend it. Attractive. It's a really attractive view from up on the terrace looking up and down the river. Attractive. Bikies, members of what are often referred to as outlaw motorcycle gangs, bikies. And rap. Did anyone go to the Shakespeare rap session? I think it's going on now, and Charlie from Charters Towers is rapping away. We could say he rapped his way through the session. Okay. Now, if you take the handout, you'll find those words in the letter to the editor that was published on 7 October 2015 by Carol DeCosta-Roke, who's a regular writer of letters to the Courier Mail. Read through, locate the words, do your own corrections, And what I'm doing here is modelling a little activity that I would frequently do anytime I was using, not any time, but many times when I was using some sort of handout, or even if it was a case of I'm subsequently going to say to kids, open your copy of the novel to page 57. And these words would be there. Okay? So, little spelling quiz, and having little activities like that as a way of saying, hey, spelling is important. We regularly spend class time on it. And which words did I select? And the point here is, this is just in a text that I was using. Now, I did think of updating this and coming up with a bit of literary text, but it wouldn't have been common to all of you, and I ran out of time. And I already had this done. So, that's what I ask students to do. Locate the words, check the spelling, and then you can ask them to use the words in a new sentence. So that's repetition, but meaningful repetition. These were the words. Why did I pick these? And a thing that we can make a connection between spelling and grammar here, and we have open class words, nouns, verbs, adjectives and adverbs. They're open because new words can get into them and old words drop out the other end. The closed class words, pronouns, prepositions, conjunctions and articles really are the most important part perhaps of a bigger group called determiners. They're essentially grammatical words. You really can't with ease invent new ones, although people are trying to come up with a new gender neutral pronoun, aren't they? Mm-hmm. Some people are suggesting Z should be used. They're grammatical words. You really can't change them much. It's a useful way to focus on what I call word families, the relationships between the open word classes. Now they were 4 of the words from the spelling quiz, which leads you into a whole host of other words, the corresponding other word class forms, and there's a whole heap of material for spelling work there then, isn't there? Second word was simplify, and the pattern here is that fy is a verb forming suffix. It's a morpheme, isn't it? And with more time I could ask you how many other words can you think of that end in fy?
Magnify, amplify.
Whole swagger. In fact, should that be ify? Because it's all ify, isn't it? Oh no, it's stupefy. They're mostly IFY. What about Spotify? That's not quite the same, is it? That's a made-up word. So, making a pattern explicit for students, but focusing on the meaning. The Latin root here is tract, meaning to drag or pull, and that's a morpheme. And you can see that in other words like detract, subtract, extract, and that could then lead you to looking at these prefixes and what they mean. But can you see how one word is then a key into spelling a whole lot of other words? There are a couple of those content descriptions we looked at earlier that touched on them, Greek and Latin roots. One group was stressed as bikies, another wrapped its way through it. Now, bikies, compare that, and CF means compare with or compare, and why is the F there? It comes from a Latin word. Bickies, we might talk about now, these are my favourite kind of bickies. And of course, a big difference between wrapped and raped, isn't it? Wrapped, short A sound, raped, long A sound. Now, these words illustrate a regular pattern in English orthography and our spelling system, and it's what I call, what Garry Collins calls, I don't think anyone else calls it this, other people might have different names for it, it's what I call the hop-hope rule, because I've just used hop and hope as sample words. And of course we've also got homophones here, haven't we? Wrapped also has those two homophones. And orthography comes from ortho, correct, and graph, meaning to write. Okay, Gary's hop-hope rule. note we've got, in each case, a one-syllable word. Same consonant sound at the beginning, same consonant sound at the end, and the difference is that the vowel sound in the first one is short and the vowel sound in the second one is long. And have a look what happens when we add suffixes that begin with vowels, like ed, ing, er. Hop, hopping, hopper, as opposed to hope, hoping, hoper, as in a no-hoper. There's a regular pattern there, isn't there? And you can see it with words like seek and sight, scrap and scrape. Now, down the bottom of that sheet was a letter which I sent in reply, which they didn't publish. Sometimes the Australian and the Courier Mail aren't discriminating enough to publish my wonderful letters. And I was primarily using this to talk to students about the place of Shakespeare and Naplan and other stuff. But how many homophones can you find there? And we're almost out of time, so we'll have to quickly... well, no, I can't give you time to find that, but hunt the homophone is a useful little activity with any bit of text. And hey, look, last year, they said homophones were a frequent source of difficulty for students in that trial exam. And you do see errors. She really means W-E-A-R, doesn't she? Unless she was going to say, where are the ones? But it's not right. So we've got whether, be, in, to, or, and of course that depends on accent. I had a year's exchange in Oregon in the early 90s and I did this sort of thing, and when I said there, an American said, no they're not. No they're not the way they spoke. Current, not, course, need, but, I, there, no. 95 words, 13 homophones. It's a problematic thing amongst a lot of our commonly used words. What are some other opportunities to teach spelling here? Well, we're almost out of time, and I'll probably press on for 5 minutes. If you need to go, I'm not insulted, just away you go. If we had more time, I'd say, well, away you go and come up with some possibilities, but I'll just point out what I thought some could be. Excellent. Here you could have a look at other words that have the same prefix, EX. Productive, prefix, stem, suffix, and compare it with words like reductive, conductive, inductive, and abduct, and so on, and that's from a Latin word meaning to lead. Morphemes can be word stems or affixes. Hope, that's my hop-hope rule. Completely, a standard pattern in English is that adverbs are the adjective plus ly. And if there's already an L on the adjective, then you end up with a double L. If there's not, you have only one L. You know, those two, perhaps old-fashioned now, standard letter closes. Yours faithfully, yours sincerely. Faithful has an L, so in faithfully we've got double L. Sincere doesn't, so it's just one L. Entertain, well, their syllables are useful to you. Happy, happiest, like happier and sillier, gloomy and so on. We change that final I before we add the ER or the EST. And the problem with different is that it looks as though there's more syllables there than there are. Well, we don't say different, do we? Say different. On the back, which you can have a play with for homework if you like, is a word game. In fact, I've got a whole swag of these. Can you come up with an answer for the first one? You have to come up with a pair of... You have to form an anagram from each word. In other words, use all the letters, rearrange them, and come up with a pair of synonyms. Anyone got one out yet? Well, I didn't make these up. They were published in the late 60s, early 70s in the Queensland Teachers Journal, and it didn't look like that. Acme and top, pair of synonyms. Aver and speak, and on they go. That's how they go. And I've got a whole swag of these, and if you want them, I can send you the word files for these. Has this situation ever happened in schools where you've worked? And what she's really thinking is, that part of your lived reality? So what you need in situations like that, and sometimes, you know, it's not, you know, filling in for someone who's absent, you know, you weren't expecting to be in any classes Tuesday afternoon because it's going to be a sports carnival or something, and then it rains and it's cancelled, and we'll go to class. What are we going to do? Well, here's an activity that engages kids and is meaningful learning, and with one of these, and there are 30 pairs in each set, and with classes at virtually any year level, I've, after a bit of introductory explanation, been able to occupy a 70-minute lesson with no difficulty at all. And while I'm not a betting man, I've usually offered $5 for anyone who can get all 30 out. Seldom have to part with the money. In the Australian Everyday, and I think in the Courier Mail, and in in-flight magazines, and a lot of other things, they have these, the Australian calls them circuit breaker. Okay, letter in the middle, which you have to use in every word, letters around the edge, and if you had that PowerPoint slide, you could just substitute letters. How many words of at least 4 letters can you form? I do this every day in Australia. Well, there's a swag. Is fate really a word? F-A-I-T? Yeah, well, we probably don't use it on its own, do we? But we use fait accompli, which is a borrowing straight from French. You know? Rather than asking permission, you go ahead and do it, and then you present the boss with, hey, it's a fait accompli, I've already done it. A similar expression, again, straight borrowing from French, au fait, I'm pretty au fait with the topic. So to summarise and come back, list these 4 principles. Start with meaning, focus on meaning, have a repertoire, and some of these things we've talked about have looked at morphology, the structure, the morphemes, the orthography, the spelling patterns, etymology, where words come from, because that will often influence spelling, and the sound system, because with lots of long words, they can look daunting to kids, but once you break them up into morphemes and syllables, the relationship between sound and letters is pretty common sense in lots of cases. What did Crystal say? 84% of words follow regular patterns. And here's my last slide. Most English words have identifiable regular patterns. Teaching of spelling should be regular, but it should not be in isolation in secondary English. It should be integrated with other work you're doing with authentic texts. And of course, kids need to be aware, as we need to be aware, that many irregular spellings are amongst the most commonly used ones. So you need to regularly visit them. And of course, you need to continually work at this. You can't just say that's the primary school teacher's problem and they should have done a better job. And look, I'm by my watch 3 minutes over time. I hope you'll forgive me.
Thank you so much, Gary. I think we all agree that was an excellent extension on Professor Exley's keynote speech this morning, and I think really good resource and also application for our classroom. So thank you so much for your time this afternoon and today.
Thank you. And remember, if you want that PowerPoint slide, if you want those word games, send me an email.